I don't know how you sit still. How do you sit still right now? Let me put it to you as plainly as I can. The next time you and I talk, we will have conference standings in the ACC. It's here. We don't have to talk anymore. We actually get to watch the games get played. We are jam-packed live high atop a very anxious downtown Nashville, Tennessee. And why is that? Because we are doing final, absolutely slam the door, take it to the bank, final predictions tonight. Triple on the final. Conference and playoff. So I'm going to tell you what I feel, and whatever's in my heart right now is whatever goes. It's a good thing we do this show live because, to be honest with you, it's the kind of show where if I got to the end and we weren't live, I'd probably tell Colin to just scrub the whole thing because I hate predictions. But we're making them tonight by the dozen, actually. We're making them tonight. Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin, that little story that popped up in John Talty and Armin Katan's book that's about to be out on newsstands. Your boy got an advanced copy of it. I got my own Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin story. And since they shared one, I'm going to expound on it. You guys will like that. Way back in the day, I shared that story, but almost none of you were listening yet. So I know we got a much bigger audience now than we did then. I'll tell you what I witnessed in the bowels of the Georgia Dome back in December of 2016. Such a simpler time. Who's the most talented team in the country? We have some thoughts we will discuss as we dive into the show tonight. I am going to predict the FSU-Georgia Tech game, by the way, and we got a major announcement on the show tonight. I got still 3 or 4 of them to come before the season starts, so we are beyond jam-packed, and therefore I can waste no more time. Because the segment I'm going to lead the show with, I didn't even just tease. That's how much we have going on. They're watching us in San Marcos, Texas. They're watching us in Orlando, Florida, Avon, Indiana, Big Spring, Missouri. Thank you guys so much. It has occurred to me that several thousand of you are new. You weren't here this time last year, and I know that. And I know we do a lot on this show that's not like the other shows, which I guess is a good thing, but we say a lot of things on here that make no sense to you. It's sort of inside baseball. It's different nomenclature. We have different features. What is Pate State? Why in the world does he call it a JP poll? What does immunity mean? So many different. What is Pate State to begin with? I've never heard of that. Well, I think what we need to do, not tonight, but on either probably the Sunday night show, is I am going to, at the end of that show, we'll do it Sunday night. Colin, hold me to this. At the end of the Sunday night show, I'm just going to do a welcome back refresher course on everything you need to know about this show. From what the JP poll is, to where you can find Friday night lines, to why we even have a tour, to what Pate State is, to, yes, what immunity means, everything in between. Why in the world did I just wear a white T-shirt on air? Is he poor? Is he homeless? Maybe yes, maybe no. I'll answer it Sunday night. But in the meantime, make sure you're following on the socials. At Late Kick Josh, I've been leaking some things slowly but surely, but we're going to just flat out flood you over the next week because I can't even break all the stuff we have going on behind the scenes on the air because that would be the whole show. So make sure you're checking it out. At Late Kick Josh. Okay, let us dive in. I'm angry. Not like Mad Dog Russo level angry. I'm not going to scream in a Jersey accent, but I am angry tonight. It's going to be a happy show, but I'm starting out a little angry. So, paper pop, which I'll also explain on the Sunday night show. Paper pop, let's dive in. Ross Dellinger had a really good / maddening article over on Yahoo Sports today. I didn't see many other people talking about it. I don't know why. It is the biggest story in college football today, for my money. There are a couple of general rules that we have on this show. General rule number 1, the wrong people have had their hands on the wheel of college football for quite a while. I don't think that's even debated by most of you. I think most of you agree with that. Whether you like certain things about the sport, holistically, no one's really had much control. No one that has business having control has had much control. Another general rule, none of them really care about you. The people making decisions really don't care about you. Which brings me to today's article. Ross Dellinger has been pumping these out. I think he's the best at covering the sport right now. And he does not work here. He works over at Yahoo Sports, but I think he's the best at covering the sport right now. And we got some good ones too, but Ross is doing a really good job. So before I even dive into the particulars, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the bottom of the screen. It says, does college football have an NFL problem? And that's part of what this is about, but really college football just got a college football problem too. So I want you to notice, as you guys go and read this for yourselves later, as I've pointed out several times, whether it's Dellinger or any of a number of other folks. It could be Marcelo, it could be Chris Hummer, it could be Matt Zenitz. Anytime someone's breaking news on the structure of our sport, whether it's realignment or whether it's college football playoff expansion or whether it's this or that, we've noticed, at Pate State at least, we've noticed lately that there are two words that you rarely see featured in these articles. And that is the word fans, and that is the word players. For a sport that is allegedly built around one and for the other, fans and players are normally absolutely dead last in decision making, because I really don't think the people making the decisions care a whole heck of a lot about either. They just have to tolerate them. You know, this would be a good sport if it weren't for the fans and players, according to a lot of these guys. So I want you to follow this logic. Let me explain to you what Ross Dellinger was talking about today. So Ross Dellinger, this story is up on Yahoo Sports right now. He was talking about how the college football playoffs got a little problem that everyone, I mean, a blind man could have seen coming, and that is they, because of their new structure, are going to have to run opposed to the NFL in the second round games. So the second round games are set for Saturday. I think one of them's Friday night, but three of them are Saturday, December 21st. One of them is 12 o'clock Eastern, one of them's 4 o'clock Eastern, and one of them's 8 o'clock Eastern. Now the problem is that 12 o'clock and that 4 o'clock game are going to run head-to-head with major NFL games. And this is like poison to these people. So they got a problem on their hands. But the problem didn't start here. Just follow me for a second. I want you to follow this logic. If you're brand new, if your cousin recruited you to come to college football and you've become a fan, if you're 14 years old and you're just starting to understand the ways of college football, follow this logic. So once upon a time, college football is just awesome, and it's built around the regular season, and Saturdays in the fall are what matter, and yeah, we crown a national champion, but unlike the other sports at the pro level, this sport is sort of built around its regular season, and we get a champion at the end as kind of a cherry on top. And it existed for a pretty good while like that, and most people were happy, most fans were happy. That doesn't mean everyone was satisfied at the end of the year and agreed with the outcome, but most folks understood, hey, this is about the regular season. The profit wasn't maximized, is the problem. Not for the fan, not for the player. The problem for the suits is the profit wasn't maximized. And so it created this fork in the road. It wasn't a singular moment, but it created this fork in the road. And they had to choose. We can either sacrifice profit to maintain the sanctity of our sport. Translation, we can leave some money on the table in exchange for keeping this thing as pristine as we can. Or, shocker, the other route, the one they chose, is we're just going to tilt the seesaw. And so, over the course of several years, you got convinced that your sport was broken. And you got convinced that, yeah, what we have is good, but it could be a lot better. And you had anecdotal examples like 2004 Auburn, an undefeated team doesn't get to play for a title. And those were used by people who really could not have cared less about Auburn to prop up the idea that this sport needs its own playoff. Candidly, I, as a kid in high school, believed it. I agreed with it. I went along with it. It was a very convincing argument. Everyone else has got it. Why wouldn't college football have it? I mean, imagine, take all the good that is college football, and we don't change that. We just put something better on the end of it. Yeah, so really what was happening, unbeknownst to little JP at the time, was they had figured out how to maximize profitability of this sport, probably at the expense of the regular season. And if it didn't harm the regular season, that's great, but they didn't care if it did, because the real money is there to be made in a playoff. And so they built themselves an ATM. They didn't call it an ATM. They called it a playoff. So they just put a sticker, that little college football playoff logo on the side of the ATM, and they started printing themselves money. And for a little while, it was interesting. And then a lot of you noticed that, well, is this really giving us anything different than we would have already gotten? A lot of the same teams that seem to have dominated once upon a time are dominating even more, and about that time you heard the drumbeat. And the drumbeat is, well, we need to expand the playoff further. We need to expand the playoff further because why? Well, you guys aren't happy with the outcome so far. Now, in reality, the people who were agreeing with you weren't really agreeing with you. They were preying upon your dissatisfaction with something that was never going to be perfect. It was not designed to be perfect. It was designed to be a primer for getting where they really wanted to get, which was to 12 teams or more. And so they said, we'll expand it again. Because Who's In had poisoned the well. Who's In, remember that? That was the ESPN marketing campaign at the advent of the playoffs. See, it didn't just come with a 4-team structure. It came with a 4-team structure, and every ounce of oxygen in the room is going to be dedicated to that 4-game structure. And so you're watching Nevada versus Utah in week 2 of the regular season, and coming in and out of breaks, we got playoff promotion. We've got, well, if the playoffs started today, we've got, oh, here are the rankings right now. Here's who would be in. Yeah, it's week 2, man. And all of a sudden we had phrases like meaningless regular season game pop up. Because if you're not playing in games that feature ramifications for the playoff, what does your game really matter? And then we had meaningless bowl game. That wasn't said by kids or players. That was said by the adults in the room. Players listened. Players started to opt out. The meaning of bowls deteriorated. And then the same people who caused that problem were right there to tell you, I've got a solution to the problem. Let's create more of what caused the problem. Let's expand. Let's have a bigger playoff. And like clapping seals, enough people went along with it. And so now we've got the 12-team playoff. The second they hit go on the 12-team playoff, they knew their schedule and they knew the problem. Much like was the case in the original format, they created the problem on purpose so they could solve the problem. So we arrive at the here and now. We haven't even played a 12-team playoff yet, but already we're going to have games run opposed to the NFL, which is going to be a problem, and you're going to have a ratings disaster on your hand. Not yours. You're a fan. You shouldn't care about it. I shouldn't care about it. But, you know, people a long way up off the street in Manhattan are going to care about it. And so here's what the solution's going to be. This brings me to Ross Dellinger's report today. It probably won't shock you to know that these people have found a solution to the problem that they caused. And you know what the solution is? Expand the playoff to 16 and start the regular season earlier than we already do. I'm going to pause for you to laugh because you probably don't believe this, but I'm not joking. They're looking at week 0 right now. We're going to have a couple of games this weekend, and they're thinking to themselves, wait a minute. If we just started everybody's week 1, the 3rd week in August, then we could have ourselves a 16-team playoff that starts the week of Thanksgiving. Follow me here. No, you don't have rivalry week anymore under this format, the week of Thanksgiving. You've got conference championship games the week of Thanksgiving so that they could then start their playoff in December and have the second week of December as their second round playoffs that don't oppose the NFL, thus saving the New Year's period for their semifinals. And you ask yourself, what does that do to the regular season? Well, I'll tell you what it does. Labor Day is no longer your kickoff weekend, which has been the case forever. That's kind of been a college football staple. Piss on that. We don't need that anymore. Thanksgiving week coinciding with rivalry week, nah. Just college football conference championship games, a few of them. Most of you won't even be playing. Your teams won't even be playing on conference championship weekend. Your regular season starts in the 3rd week of August, so you're going to take the regular season schedule, you're going to turn it on its ear again, and not a care will be given because the regular season doesn't matter to these people. The regular season almost gets in the way for these people. There's not a single backbone in the room when it comes to decision-making in college football. So you might listen to that, and if I were me, listening to me say that, I'd say, well, hold on. What would you do different? I'll tell you what I'd do different. I'd run my race and couldn't care less about what the NFL is doing. But Josh, that'll kill your ratings. No, it won't kill my ratings. Less people will watch some of the games in the short term and maybe the long term. But I have a little different vision on this sport than some others because these folks largely envision themselves as professional executives, professional commissioners. They fancy themselves the same way that they look at in the pro ranks. They just happen to be in the college ranks, so they want to model everything after the pro ranks. And I've never thought that way. I think this is the best sport in the world. It's going to run second to the NFL. It'll always run second to the NFL. Notice I didn't say 3rd or 4th or 5th. It's not behind any other sport in this country. College football is more popular than any other sport in this country, sans the NFL. It'll always be that way. But I'll tell you what the big fear is that's only partly realized. The big fear is, well, if we run opposed to NFL games, our ratings will be lesser than. That's true. Here's what's never realized. The NFL hopes you stay not realizing this. It's not realized that NFL advertising is sold against an expected figure. And NFL advertising is very complex, but in a very general sense, when you've got Raiders Chiefs running third week of December, there is an expected number that game's going to do. Just like in the local news world, there's an expected number, roughly. It's a deliverable. We do it with our partners at Academy and Quick Trip and FanDuel. We have deliverables, roughly, that we tell them we're going to deliver in exchange for the dollars that they hand over in ad partnership. Well, here's what happens. What happens is if something cuts into our number and we don't match our deliverable, what we either do is lose that partner in the future or we have to comp them. We have to return part of the dollar figure they gave us because we didn't meet our deliverable. In this world and in this context, what happens is, yeah, the college football playoff game rating goes down a little bit, but it doesn't evaporate. What actually happens is there's a little chunk taken out of that NFL game as well. Not as many people watch that NFL game as well, because I know this may be a shock to the folks on Park Avenue, but there are some folks out there who would watch Georgia versus Oregon round 2 over Chiefs Raiders regular season. A lot more folks would watch Chief Raiders. I don't doubt that. Not as many if they know there's an alternative and it's a college football playoff game on. So in the short term, a one-off, that wouldn't really matter, and the NFL would flex on you. And, of course, everyone in the college football world would crater because their spines are made of the same things the accordion's made of. But if there were someone who looked at it and said, that sucks, man, our number was lesser than, but we move on, it would be the worst nightmare of the NFL. The audacity, by the way, of the NFL continues to amaze me. Continues to amaze me, and they can get away with it. And so, they run their race, and they don't worry about it. But just think about the attitude of the NFL. It's king. It is the biggest content-creating machine in the world. It is by 10 miles the most popular sport in the world. And it has at its disposal, free of charge, a marketing and developmental branch called college football that it doesn't even have to subsidize. College football is self-sustaining, and it markets their players before they even get there, to the point where when you draft guys, when guys are taken on the first night of the NFL draft and they walk across that stage, 32 out of 32, you already know those players. They're not mysteries. They're not four-star players that you have to look up the profile of. You know them. You know them because you've watched them on Saturdays for 3 or 4 years. The NFL didn't have to pay a dime for that, but they benefit from it. They didn't have to pay a dime to have the kid go to Oklahoma State or go to Virginia Tech or go to Georgia and get developed for 2, 3, 4 years by the best college coaches in America, but they benefit from it. So there's a bunch of take. There's a ton of take. There's a ton of benefit on the NFL side from having college football. And not only do they not give back to college football, they openly impede on college football's ability to carve out their own territory in December and January. Now, this doesn't hurt my feelings a whole lot because I couldn't care less about playoff expansion anyway. I wish we didn't do it. But since we've done it, if I were in charge, what I'd love to see is some folks in the room roll up their sleeves and understand maybe you got a fight on your hand. Now, I know this is like pacifist city, the folks who run college football right now, but maybe you got to get bloodied a little bit. That's how fights work. But if you're ever going to kind of carve out your corner of this thing and you guys plan on expanding, you guys actually plan on living in this expanded playoff world, you're not going to do it by continuing to cower to the NFL, or else they'll turn you into a spring league before too much longer. Because here's the other elephant in the room that everyone knows. The NFL's also going to expand their regular season. They're going to go to 18 games. Sooner or later, they're going to do that. That's widely believed. So what are you going to do then? You're not going to live in a world where you don't have to oppose the NFL at some point. So my answer is either go back to the old way of doing things, which I'd love, but it's not feasible, or oppose them and just see what happens. I think you'd be surprised. The whole new Saturday tour is ready. This time next week, actually, we'll be doing our Thursday show. Then we'll be headed down to Gainesville. We are proud to partner with Quick Trip. Quick Trip is proud to fuel this entire tour. And we have given away, I don't know how many gallons of free gas already this week, but I told you guys, maybe some of you thought I was bluffing. The moment a week ago we announced this partnership, I told you I have it at my discretion to just give away free gas. Not like 1 or 2 gas cards, guys. I have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of discretionary giveaway at my disposal. So we've been doing it this week. If you've been following me at Late Kick Josh, you've seen we've been doing it all over social this week. One guy had a 74-gallon truck tank, and we filled that thing up. So that won't be a norm probably. But we've been giving it away, and that's the benefit of having Quick Trip as our partner. We appreciate him. You see the QR code on the screen right now. I'd highly advise you. I had a buddy from back home ask me, hey, how do I save on gas? Well, go download their app, firstly, because we'll eventually have a carve-out in there for our audience that gets you special offers that no one else gets. But even if they don't have the carve-out right now, just go download the app. It's worth it if you just drive a car and you're anywhere near a Quick Trip. I know they don't have one in every major city, guys, but a lot of you do have a Quick Trip. Some of you have been traveling a couple of miles extra just to go to Quick Trip. I see you. I appreciate you. They do as well. And we will be on the road all year courtesy of Quick Trip. All right. It's that time. It's that time. I had to split this up in the show tonight because I didn't want to do conference and then playoff predictions all at one time. Appreciate you guys being tuned in live, by the way. Here's a little smiley face for the chat. Happy Thursday. Happy vibes all around. And I say that because I'm about to upset some people, and then in turn you will lash out at me in the comments. But that's okay. That's okay, because even that I think is done out of love. Final conference predictions. This is it. This is the one I want you to hold me to. Anything else I've said beforehand, completely disregard. It never happened. The ACC is going to pan out as follows. We start the season with FSU having an over-under win total of 9.5. Miami's got that as well. Clemson's got an over-under win total of 8.5. However, Clemson has slightly better odds at FanDuel at the moment to win the conference than do the Miami Hurricanes. Okay, well, that's what FanDuel's odds market says. What do I say? I say that I have shifted here. We made predictions a month ago. Those no longer exist. I have shifted. We've gathered as much intel. We've gone and seen as many teams in person as we can, which is tricky. You've looked at injuries. We've looked at everything we can possibly look at. I am keeping my same ACC championship prediction in terms of matchup, but I'm going to go with Miami over Florida State to win the conference. My thinking here is several-fold. So the first is I don't think many people doubt the players. I don't think many people doubt the talent roster at Miami. If I were to go as far as to put those players in Clemson uniforms, I think Clemson would be a consensus favorite to win this conference. And the reason's obvious. The reason is because you've come to trust Dabo Swinney. You've come to trust the profile of the program. They have delivered in big moments before. Dabo has been at the mountaintop a couple of times. You guys don't trust Mario Cristobal. A lot of you don't. You guys don't trust that coaching staff. A lot of that coaching staff's an unknown. I get why you're there. I just don't. I don't think living in the rearview mirror in this particular case is the best way to go about forecasting this season, because they got it on the line of scrimmage. And they're surprisingly, I think, deep, deceptively deep at tailback. They're going to probably end up having the best quarterback in the conference, in my opinion, in Cam Ward. Pass rush will be filthy. And I think they match up, therefore, very well with everyone they play, because I think they can win in a variety of ways. It should be a team that continues to get better. This should not be a team whose peak comes in the first few weeks and then fades off. Very intentional about that. They've been very intentional about everything they've done down there in that vein. And so I'm going to take Miami over FSU. Clemson, I'm right there with them. I just still, in terms of consistency offensively and the overall high-level depth, that's what I doubt about them. Too much to put them in the conference championship game. Don't expect a bad year for Clemson, but I did not find myself able to take the added step with the Tigers there. Virginia Tech and NC State did get looks. Partly because I think the quality of team will be enhanced, partly because they both have very workable schedules. Neither of those would shock me, being in the conference title game. I think I would be pretty surprised if either won the conference title game, though. And I know you can say, well, that's only one more game, but without divisions, they are guaranteed to play the best the ACC has to offer. I think that'll be Miami. I think they'll win it. Let's move on. We go in no order whatsoever here. The SEC is next up. I think I had Texas versus Ole Miss about a month ago. Many people disagreed, not shockingly. So right now, the up-to-the-minute FanDuel odds board looks as follows. Georgia is number 1 and Texas is number 2. Those are the only teams in the conference with win totals in the double digits. Both of them are at 10.5. Bama, Ole Miss, LSU, those are the 3 with win totals at 9.5. Now Tennessee, actually Missouri has 9.5 as well. Tennessee has gone from like 8.5 to 9.5 back down to 8.5. So there's been a lot of fluidity with the Vols. Here's where I'm going to land in the SEC. I am keeping Texas as my conference champ. I am replacing Ole Miss with Alabama in the conference championship game. So fitting that Colin had B-roll of Sark in Bryant-Denny Stadium to start this. I'm going to take Texas over Alabama in the SEC championship game. The collective level of talent at Texas, I trust. I trust that while it may not be a shot-for-shot remake of last year's team, you lose guys on the interior of the defensive line. What I look at is the aggregate of talent acquisition. And at Texas, they've done it plenty well enough, and they've spread the talent all over the roster plenty well enough that in the aggregate, this team should be good enough. They should be good enough to be favored in most every game they play. I also think there's this thing that'll happen psychologically with Texas going from the Big 12 to the SEC. There's a thought that, well, if they had close games in the Big 12, they may get chewed up in the SEC. I actually think it gets your attention when you look out over the horizon and you see a different caliber opponent on your schedule. I think it'll serve them well. I think the same thing will happen at Oklahoma, by the way. I just don't necessarily think it's Oklahoma's year to compete for the SEC championship. But I'm taking Texas there. Pass catchers, they backfilled them really well. I had some concern about that. I don't have concern. My concern is about their depth at tailback, but I think in a complementary fashion, they will find a way. They'll find a way to get it done. Quinn Ewers has a big year, and I trust Sark calling plays as much as I trust anyone on either side of the ball. Bama, I think, will gain steam as the season goes on. I think they'll be one of the best rushing teams in the SEC as well. I am cautiously optimistic about their defense. They don't have game records. Them and Georgia both strike me as programs that have accumulated really solid veteran depth on the defensive front. They don't match the vintage versions of themselves. This is not mid-20 teens Alabama in terms of a pass rush. I don't think. On the interior, I mean. This is not Georgia a couple of years ago in that vein. They're both plenty good enough to be there. I think Alabama's going to continue to scale. And Kalen DeBoer, man, he inherited just a much better roster situation than I think most people realize. Bama's not down the notches that I think people think they are. And they will develop wide receiver 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So I think Bama's going to be right there. Georgia is right there as well. I've got them power rated as slightly better than Texas and Alabama. It's just that I don't have them significantly better, and Georgia's schedule is tougher. This is a very nip-and-tuck thing. Georgia could just as easily be in there over either one of these teams. If they all played the same schedule, I'd have Georgia in there and have them winning it. But I may differ with the pack in that I don't think that there is any kind of gap between, or there's not much of a gap between Georgia and the next couple of teams in the SEC. I think it's very competitive. Georgia plays both of these teams on the road. They play Ole Miss on the road. They play Tennessee. I think the totality of Georgia's schedule is a little bit too much. Still solidly a playoff team, but I think that's what keeps them out of there. LSU is a team with an over-under win total of 9.5. I have far too much doubt about the consistency of LSU's offense. I think turnovers at the quarterback position have been a bit too much of an issue in fall camp for me to totally feel comfortable with. I'm going to have to see that defense have quantum leaps in improvement, but I will say this. If they get past USC and they have an emphatic statement in week 1, that can be a team that's off to the races. So take the doubt I just had. Well, if it's not valid, and we'll know early on if it's not, that could be a team that's off to the races. Remember that game against Ole Miss? They got a massive bye advantage there. They will be rested at home. Ole Miss playing their 7th game in 7 weeks. So the schedule could all of a sudden, after 1 week, make you look and say, I may want to rethink that LSU pick. Can't do that, though. Got to make the pick right now. Ole Miss, I think the secondary games on their schedule are a little more treacherous than folks are making it out to seem. Ole Miss's schedule is on the screen right now, and everyone's eyes go to at LSU, where they are significantly disadvantaged, like we just said, in terms of bye week. But then it goes to the Georgia game, and it's like no one's paying attention to the fact that they play Kentucky at home. Kentucky's a top 30 team in the JP poll. and should be. They should be power rated up there. They go to South Carolina. At South Carolina, still pretty early in the season when South Carolina still has their legs. Maybe Lenora Sellers is popping over there. They've got Oklahoma at home. People just chalk that up as a win. I'm not sure what world folks are living in, where you just kind of think you put the penciled in W's next to Oklahoma at Florida. Now, that's later in the year, and maybe Florida's done in by that point. If that game were higher, if that game were earlier in the year, I'd have a lot more concern about it. But the totality of that schedule is not as easy, I think, as people make it. I think Ole Miss is a playoff team, though. I just don't have them in Atlanta anymore. In the Big 12, this is by 10 miles the most unpredictable conference in college football this year. I have called it America's College Football Conference. I believe that. I believe that pound for pound, this is the most fun you could have watching this sport this year. If you say that you miss the way it used to be, not in 1967, but maybe even in 2007, then this is the conference for you. The most unpredictable that you could ever imagine. Utah has not played a single conference game in the Big 12. They're the favorite to win the conference. They're brand new, and they're favored to win the conference. Right behind them is Kansas State, Oklahoma State. UCF has surged. UCF now has the fourth best odds to win this thing. Better than Kansas and Arizona. Iowa State's had some money come in on them. Not just mine, but mine is in on them. So here's where I'm going in the Big 12. I am keeping the matchup that I had. I've got Iowa State versus Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. I am taking Oklahoma State to win that because I think if Oklahoma State's there, then they have perfected the style of play I think they're equipped to put into practice this year. And if they've perfected that, then they're as good a matchup as any for Iowa State, and I think they beat Iowa State if they're there. This is really, really tough because there are like 4 or 5 other teams. I'm terrified to overlook Avery Johnson at Kansas State. I am very curious about Utah. They play Oklahoma State on the road in week 4. 2 schools have thought about Utah. I've got one. We'll see if it's right. Utah was always a matchup nightmare in the Pac-12 because Utah was the only school that played their style of ball in the Pac-12. In the Big 12, a bunch of other folks play that style. This is not the pinball conference it once was. This is a roll up your sleeves. This is a get your lip bloodied sort of conference now. Has been for a few years. They play good defense. That doesn't mean they're going to litter the first round of the NFL draft, but if you understand how fundamentally sound football looks, they play it in the Big 12. So Utah goes from a conference where virtually no one plays the way they do, and they're a matchup problem every week, to a conference full of folks who try and do what they do. It may be that Utah still does that better than anyone else, but I actually think what used to be an advantage for Utah is not nearly as much of an advantage anymore. And in totality, maybe the schedule catches up to it. Maybe Utah doesn't stand out. And I'm taking a chance on that because they could very easily stand out and just steamroll their way to Dallas for the Big 12 championship game. But I don't think so. I think it'll be Iowa State versus Oklahoma State. And I think the biggest wild card here for me is UCF. I understand why they've surged the way they have. Wild cards in the Big 12, it's kind of relative because Kansas is also that. West Virginia and Arizona are also that. I took about 10 minutes and looked at Texas Tech and TCU today. I can very easily make an argument for TCU, who, by the way, I didn't plan on doing this. Let me just tell you, I've got 10. I did have this written down. I've got 10 Big 12 teams in the top 40 of the JP poll, and all of them except for one, it's all like 20 to 40. Like, that's where the conference is. There's not a national championship contender here. It's a conference that probably gets one team in the playoff. I think that'll be the case. Unbelievably entertaining product ahead. Iowa State, Oklahoma State's my pick. That's by far the lowest confidence pick I have in terms of a matchup. In the Big Ten, I think this is the highest confidence I have in a matchup. I'm taking Ohio State and Oregon, same as I did a month ago. I'm taking Ohio State to beat Oregon, same as I did a month ago. They match up in week 5 or 6, whichever it is, October 12th in Eugene. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter who wins that game. It matters. But I don't think the outcome matters in terms of what this matchup will be. From the psychological standpoint, being able to preach get back and revenge to your team for the better part of a season, yeah, that's great. And the loser will have that advantage, if you want to call it that. They'll also have far less margin for error, but I think they'll meet in Indy. I think there is a little bit of a gap between these two teams and the rest of this conference. Ohio State has to get this done. Ohio State has to get this done. They have to beat Michigan. I don't care. If they lose to Oregon, that's not the end of the world, because they get a shot at Penn State a few weeks later, and they get Michigan at home at the end of the year. And if they win those two, it doesn't matter. They will be in Indianapolis. I don't think that defense is going to let them down, even if they do lose to Oregon early. I don't think Oregon's going to Indy and us watching Ohio State's defense let them down. I think Ohio State's going to come through. I think they got to come through here. Now, they'll be in the playoff unless they suffer a third loss. They'll be in the playoff, but if they're not able to get it done against two of these premier teams on this conference schedule, they're not going to win the national title, in my estimation. It probably means quarterback hamstrung them too much. That's probably what it means. I don't think that's the style this team will take on. I think there's as much a sense and urgency for a team this talented as we've ever seen, and I think they'll show it. I think they'll show it. Michigan and Penn State, I simply think, are a little bit of a notch below those other two. Both are playoff caliber teams. I don't think they're going to win this conference this year. So the number one and number two odds teams in Ohio State, Oregon, according to FanDuel, are the teams I have playing for the Big Ten Championship. So we're taking Ohio State over Oregon. I'm taking Oklahoma State over Iowa State. I'm taking Texas over Alabama. And I'm taking Miami over FSU. And, of course, in terms of the new playoff, which I'll talk about later in the show, or if you're watching the individual video, I talk about it in another video, that would mean that your buys, your number 1 through 4 in any order for the playoff, would be Ohio State, Texas, Miami, and Oklahoma State. And then we got a G5 team in there somewhere. We let the chips fall where they may for the other, what would that be, 6 spots, I guess, 5 or 6 spots. You know, Academy Sports and Outdoors could hook you up no matter where you wanted to tailgate. A lot of you are, unbeknownst to you right now, you're going to have home playoff games. Did you know that? Did you know that later in this very show, I'm going to be talking to you guys about home playoff games, who I think is going to host a home playoff game. Excuse me, the dew point's a little low in Nashville, so we've got to apply the lip balm, which could be purchased at Academy Sports and Outdoors. You know, I want you to focus on something with me. I was talking to Alex over at Academy, because we deal with Academy directly, and he was talking about tailgating. And if you grow up pretty much anywhere near where I grew up, but also extending well beyond just the South, you know the scene on a game day Saturday. The scene on a game day Saturday is you have got Academy tents and Academy chairs as far as the eye can see. It's such a beautiful thing. It just as easily could be your son's Little League game on a Saturday. Academy tents and chairs all over the place. But here's what you may not know. Half the grills at those tailgates either came from Academy or could be purchased at Academy. A lot of the equipment that you wouldn't even think to purchase from Academy can be purchased from Academy. A lot of the gear you're wearing could have been purchased from Academy if it wasn't. So all I'm saying is, for the show that makes, or for the store that makes this show free to you, I would humbly ask that you give them a shot. I know you guys. I know you're buying this stuff anyway. Check out Academy and academy.com if you cannot get there in person. Good talk with Academy today. Really, really good talk with Academy today. I mean, like capital R, really good talk. If you're watching live, welcome in. If you are listening or watching tomorrow, also welcome in. Hope you have a good Friday. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and subscribe to the podcast. Now, we have other matters to attend to. So, John Talty and Armin Katayan have teamed up to write a book called The Price, and it is on newsstands August 27th. I've got myself an advanced copy. It is very eye-opening. These are two of the best at what they do, and there is a story from this book making the rounds. And the story, you may not be surprised to learn, is about Nick Saban and his time with former offensive coordinator Lane Kiffin. Now, Nick Saban is as diplomatic as it comes and was when he was a coach. You never heard him throw his staff under the bus. But that does not mean it was very harmonious at all times behind the scenes. So there is a quote from a story, and there's kind of a paraphrased version of the story that's making the rounds from some folks who got an advanced copy of this book. And it's basically explaining how during Kiffin's tenure, he had the same agent, as he still does, as Nick Saban, Jimmy Sexton. They're both repped by CAA. CAA has a lot of the big clients from the head coaching perspective in the SEC. So I will explain to you what I think is the biggest perceived gap in perception and reality. So perception and reality don't always match in a lot of ways. But I've intimated this before with you guys, but I'm going to go a little deeper tonight. The perception versus the reality of how hires are made in college football could not be any more different. There is a world that normal fans think exists when it comes to hires. And then there's the actual way that hires happen. And these two do not touch. These two do not touch at all. And frankly, I think it would disappoint a lot of you, the way that hires actually happen in this sport. And it has a lot to do, I mean a lot to do, with who you're represented by. I don't think that's a surprise to you guys. I think what the surprise is when a head coach needs to backfill a defensive line position, it's not that head coach, flipping through the Rolodex or going to his memory bank for all of the years and years and years of relationships and wisdom that he has acquired, and he's not going through film evaluating candidates. He is calling his agent, or he's answering a call from his agent who's beat him to it, and he's getting a list sent to him. And it's basically, here's the ones you can pick from, and that's how it happens. Even with Nick Saban, that's how it happened. And so it's detailed in this story how Jimmy Sexton talked Nick Saban into giving Lane Kiffin a shot. And Lane Kiffin was Lane Kiffin, and so that's where the story picks up. And Saban is on the phone calling Jimmy Sexton every name in the book, threatening to fire him for ever sending this expletive to my coaching staff. And that kind of went on for a while, and famously, Saban fired Kiffin the week of the national championship game. Okay, that's how bad it got. And then Lane Kiffin leaves, and he goes on to do what he does, and now he's the head coach at Ole Miss, and they may very well win the SEC this year for all we know. And any time that they've publicly spoken about each other, it's always been very cordial. It wasn't all that way behind the scenes. So, once upon a time, I came here to this company, but before that, I was working in local news down in Columbus, Georgia. So I loved college football my whole life. I finally get myself from radio to TV, and I'm in position where I can get credentialed to go to games. So the first times that I ever got to really be around Nick Saban's Alabama were the mid-20 teens. So 2014, 2015, 2016 comes around, and they're in the SEC championship game. And Lane Kiffin is the offensive coordinator there, and this is the last year that he was the OC there. And I think they played Florida or Missouri. I can't remember who it was, but they won the game. But leading up to the game, there were all these rumors about Kiffin. And was he going to take this job or that job? The LSU job, I think, was coming open. And so there were a lot of rumors. Okay, so no one knew what to believe as far as the external. No one knew what to believe. But Lane Kiffin's name was a very hot commodity. So Kiffin had made a promise. There was a report that there was a promise that he made to Saban that he wasn't going to talk to any other school until after the SEC championship game. So the game happens. I'm on the field for it. And it's one of the first SEC championship games I got to cover. I think I was there the first couple of years, so that may have been the third one. But, the whole world's still kind of new to me from that perspective. I walk off the field after the celebration and everything. I walk off the field. I'm walking down a tunnel. It's the same tunnel as Bama goes down to go to their locker room. Jimmy Sexton's standing right there. He is standing there, and I kid you not, he has a phone in his hand. He's got the full hand over the speaker. He is waiting for Lane Kiffin to come off the field. He has a phone call that his client needs to take. And so Kiffin grabs the phone as he walks off the field. I can't prove to you who he's talking to. I can pretty well prove to you what that was in conjunction with, because Kiffin ended up taking, I think, the FAU job a month or so later. I walked down the tunnel, and I had my iJosh with me at the time. I snapped a picture, just in case you guys didn't believe this. I just kept it with me until a couple of years ago I tweeted it out, and I didn't really go much further into detail. This is it. If you're listening on a podcast, we have Jimmy Sexton looking at his other phone, and we have Lane Kiffin on the phone that Sexton has just handed him, talking to who knows who. But that wasn't the part that stood out to me. The part that stood out to me is Nick Saban is represented by this same man. And it was the first time I ever saw how this dynamic works. I see the game on the field, and then I see the post game, and Vern and Gary say goodbye, and that's my exposure to the sport, just like yours, up until a few years before this point. But now you're seeing the sausage get made behind the scenes. Now you're seeing the inner workings. So here was what was wild to me. So me knowing Saban's repped by Sexton just like Lane Kiffin is, Nick Saban walks down the tunnel, walks right past both of them, and no eye contact is made. Not a word is said. And me knowing full well, that's his agent too. And I'm thinking, wow, what a massive awkward conflict of interest this may be. Except Jimmy Sexton's standing there and might as well have yawned and pulled a toothpick out from behind his ear and put it in. It's just like standard operating procedure for him. So then Saban walks back out the locker room because he has to go to the post-game press conference. And I followed him because I just wanted to see what happens here. Like, what does this look like? He gets done. He walks back to the locker room. They're still standing there. He walks back by both of them again doesn't say a word to either one of them. And then they're ready to go, okay? Because the way this works is in these championship games, it takes a little longer. So the coach has a trophy presentation. And then you've got post-game obligations with a network. At that time, it would have been CBS. And then you've got your post-game press conference, which is going to be extended because they talk to the losing coach and the winning coach. And so what's happening with your players during that time is they're getting showered, they're getting dressed, they're grabbing their Chick-fil-A box, and they're getting on the buses. So the buses are ready to go. By the time Nick Saban gets done with his press conference, he goes in there, he may shower, he changes into his suit to travel in, he's ready to go. Lane Kiffin's not ready to go. Nowhere close to ready to go because he's been on the phone the entire time. I'm just standing there watching all this. It's theater. It's great. So Ellis Ponder, who ended up being a long time like right-hand man for Nick Saban, he's still at Alabama. He was the DFO, chief operating officer for a long time. He may have already been the DFO, if not the assistant DFO. But his role is to make sure everyone gets out of here, everyone gets on the bus, because we got to get back over to Hartstone, we got to fly back to Tuscaloosa, and he works for essentially someone who gets pissed off if there is a second wasted here or there. And so it's a very, very heat-seeking position that he's had over there for a long time. And it is really not synced up at all with having to manage someone like Lane Kiffin. So I watch him tell Kiffin 2 or 3 times, you got to get showered, you got no time, you got to get on the bus. Then it turns into you don't have time to shower, you got to get on the bus. And this was my first real peek as to how Lane Kiffin operated on a little different wavelength than everyone else. Ellis finally yells at him. It's time to get on the bus, we got to go. Everyone else is on the bus. Kiffin says, okay. Ellis Ponder turns his back. Lane runs in the locker room and jumps in the shower. I believe he got left at the building that night. I believe that's one of the times they had to leave him at the stadium. So I watched all this happen, and it was like my first real indoctrination into how these organizations, even the ones that are operating at the highest level, like Alabama. Alabama's the #1 program in the country here. They're coming off a national title. They're about to get within a second of another national championship. Kiffin's going to get fired as the OC the week before the national title game. It just goes to show you, you hear all these rumors about these teams that go 4-8 and how their staff is a mess and how there's all kind of discontent. It was like that at Alabama. They just won anyway. So if you want to know how great Nick Saban is, it's not all the titles he won. It's he dealt with some of the same mess and actually dealt with a lot of consequences from his success above and beyond what his peers dealt with, and he won anyway. It never dropped off. Alabama never dropped from being the top program in the country, and that was fascinating. So the book is called The Price. It's by John Talty and Armin Katayan, and it will be out August 27th, which I believe is the same day that Connor Stallion's documentary drops. One has nothing to do with the other. I got to tell you, and I got to move on because we're about to do final playoff predictions here. So just get yourselves ready. I do want to say before we dive into the season, the way we operate here is we've got a college football show that we do 3 nights per week. I am not a former coach or a former player. I don't come with the natural network of resources that a former player or a coach in this seat would have. But we've still built a monster of a show. And we try and make it the most informed college football show in the world. The way we do it is, over the years, we have built, and I kid you not, a massive network of contacts A lot of them are coaches, agents, ADs, several of them. In fact, I heard from 2 of them today. Just little bits and pieces, little tidbits here and there. Legal types. We've got private pilots that watch the show that give us information from time to time. Folks in the private security world, stadium ops, not to mention recruiting and player personnel, the NIL space. So I just wanted to say thank you, guys. You know who you are. A lot of girls, too. Thank you, guys and girls. You know who you are. And for those of you who are listening to the show, just know these are names that never get mentioned on air because the trade-off is they have to remain anonymous. But it's sometimes they get something from it. A lot of times they get nothing from it. They're feeding us information because they feel an attachment to the show, because it's a very communal feel around here. But I appreciate it because those folks don't have to do that, and they do it. And trust me, I appreciate it because it creates a different show. It creates a much more viable show and a show with the reputation that I myself could never give it. So I really appreciate it. And if you haven't already reached out and you want to be a part of it, trust me, my DMs are open. Am I nervous? No. Am I scared? Also no. Could this go sideways? Possibly, but I'm going to do it anyway. Final playoff predictions. So to get you up to speed with where things are, I did these a month ago, and then I woke up like a week ago, and I was not happy with the predictions I put out a month ago. So I want you to scrap them, forget them, erase the Etch-a-Sketch in your memory, clean slate. This is what I'm going to war with. I have got Ohio State winning the Big Ten. I have got Texas winning the SEC. I have got Miami winning the ACC. And I've got Oklahoma State winning the Big 12. The reason I mentioned those conference champs is because they will have the top 4 seeds and therefore the first round buys. That's the order I've got them in. Ohio State, Texas, Miami, Oklahoma State. I've got those as your 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course, in this world, in this 12-team playoff, remember how the bracket is structured. We do not reseed after every round. So it is guaranteed that Ohio State, as the 1 seed, they'll play the winner of 8 versus 9. Just keep that in mind because that's going to be a really big talking point down the road. All right, so here's how the full bracket looks. I'm going to tell you the other teams I've got in this thing now. Oregon loses the Big Ten championship game. I've got him at 5. Bama loses the SEC championship game. I've got him at 6. FSU loses the ACC championship game. I've got him at 7. So the thinking here, and I don't know that this is the way it's going to be, but my thinking, and I think the way it's got to be for the committee to maintain any kind of, integrity, is they've got to reward teams that made the conference championship game. You can't have Oregon and Alabama losing that thing and then dropping below teams that didn't play in conference title weekend. So even though they got another loss on the resume, I don't think they're dropping very far. Georgia at number 8 is not a conference title loser, but I don't think the Big 12's conference title loser will get the same treatment. So I think those big 3 there, Oregon, Bama, FSU, that's 5, 6, and 7. I got Georgia at number 8 because I think Georgia's going to have a couple of losses on their resume that keep them from Atlanta, but those losses are probably going to be to either the teams that were in Atlanta or one of the 2 teams that was in Atlanta and like an Ole Miss. So Georgia's going to have a really strong resume. Number 9 through 12, I've got Penn State as a 9 seed. Penn State has a Penn State year where they drop 1 or 2 games to the big opponents. I've got them, I think, losing 1 of them this year. But by and large, they're a good team. I think the offense will be better, and they'll be a solid 9 seed. Ole Miss, I've got them in the playoff. Don't have them in the conference title game anymore. Got them in the playoff at number 10. Notre Dame I have as a 2-loss team. I think that'll be good enough to back them into the playoff as an 11 seed, and I am kicking Liberty out of this thing. I was listening to someone talk the other day, and it kind of dawned on me that not only does this committee need to send a message with rewarding you for playing for a conference title, they've got to send a message about strength of schedule. And there is no way that you guys need to be letting that Liberty team in there. I know that Liberty fans, I know you guys tried to schedule some Power 4 teams, and they said no. And you're like, that's not our fault. Well, that's true, but it's not the committee's fault either. Like, we have to go on what we have to go on. So Memphis goes and plays FSU this year. I think there's a world where a 10-2 Memphis ends up being ranked over Liberty, and should be, because that's the disparity in strength of schedule. So there you go. Penn State, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Memphis. That's 9, 10, 11, and 12. This is what that means the bracket would look like. And, brother, we got some matchups here. That means we get Georgia versus Penn State. And it would be Penn State at Georgia in round 1. We would have Memphis at Oregon in a body bagging, most likely. More on that in a second. We would have Ole Miss at FSU. So Rebels going down to Tallahassee for round 1. Weather figures to not be a factor there. It figures to be pretty comfortable, actually. And how about just going ahead and sending Notre Dame to Tuscaloosa for round 1? Now, there are going to be people in the comment section who say, oh, Mr. Anti-Playoff Expansion, you sound hypocritical. You sound like you're into these matchups. I am. I'm very into the matchups. Like I've told you repeatedly, the playoff as a product is going to be amazing. What we trade off to get there is not amazing, and that's a whole other conversation. So forget about that for now. If we're talking about the playoff, this is pretty incredible. Memphis at Oregon, Notre Dame at Alabama, Ole Miss at Florida State, Penn State at Georgia. I'm going to tell you right now who I'd take here. I'd take Oregon over Memphis. I would take Alabama over Notre Dame. I would take Ole Miss to go into Tallahassee and beat Florida State. And I would take Georgia over Penn State. So 3 of 4 home teams win there. That means you got 4 SEC teams in the quarterfinals. And something everyone's watching is that 12 versus 5. So there's a lot of debate right now. And the stat crowd would tell you one thing, and I think the gut feel crowd would tell you another thing. So if you listen to a data analyst, they will absolutely tell you, just unequivocally, there's no debate here. It always behooves you to get the number 1 seed and get a first-round bye than it does to have to be the 5 seed and play one more game. Then there's another person who comes in, and Colin, could you do me a favor? Throw up the bracket you just threw up again. Because there's another person who would come in and they'd say, okay, I'll grant you, Oregon there is the 5 seed. Yeah, they would have to play one more game than Ohio State. But look at Oregon's draw. Oregon would play the FCS team, or the G5 team, Memphis in this case, could be someone else. They'd be solidly favored. They'd get them at home. They'd win the game. They'd play them. Then they'd get the lowest ranked bye team, which is probably the Big 12 team. So you ask yourself, would you rather be Ohio State and have to play Georgia one time, or would you rather be Oregon and play a G5 team and then a Big 12 team? Some years, I think it may be a wash. Some years, in fact, many years, maybe it makes sense to have the bye. But if you're just telling me the totality of playing one more game is what disproportionately tilts it, I'm going to tell you, case by case, you may be wrong on that. And I'm going to tell you right now, if Liberty's in that spot instead of Memphis, for example, you absolutely give me Oregon's draw. I'll absolutely take one more game playing it at home. I don't care what the data says, because I know why that data says what it says. The biggest risk to me here is added risk of injury. I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to take on Liberty or Memphis, and then I'm going to happily take on the Big 12 champ over having to play Georgia in round 2, or a team that beat Georgia. So anyway, that's a side conversation, but it will be a main piece of the conversation come playoff time. So let's move on. Now, I just filled that in. Here's where I've got us going. After Georgia beats Penn State, after Oregon beats Memphis, after Ole Miss beats FSU, after Bama beats Notre Dame, that gives us our next round, and that is Ohio State versus Georgia. Now, keep in mind, because we can't have too many nice things in this sport, none of the rest of these games are at home. They're all on neutral sites because folks who really don't care about you much have to make their money. Ohio State versus Georgia is a national championship game, basically, just like it was a couple of years ago in the semifinal game. We've got Oregon against Oklahoma State. I would have Texas versus Ole Miss here. I'd have Bama versus Miami here. I am going to take, in this order, Ohio State over Georgia. I would take Oregon over Oklahoma State. I would take Texas over Ole Miss. And I would take Alabama over Miami. If that's real, those are some heavy hitter matchups. That is a heavy-duty lineup of games there. And honestly, where's your biggest upset? Oklahoma State, if they beat Oregon, because it's the Big 12 over the Big 10, I think fairly sizable. If Miami were to take down Bama, and watching that personnel, man, would be fascinating. But Ohio State, Georgia is like a main event national title level game that's happening in the quarterfinal. So again, you lock down that 1 seed at your own peril. You're going to be playing someone good. That 1 seed he's going to be rested, but he's going to be playing someone good out the gate. Okay, now let's go to the semifinals. Your Final Four. Let's just say it pans out this way, friends. Your Final Four, according to my bracket, is Ohio State versus Oregon and Texas versus Alabama. Now, Josh, that sounds familiar. It is, because that's a rematch of your Big Ten title game, and that's a rematch of your SEC championship game. And since I don't think there's any skill in changing your pick here, aside from flipping a coin, if I took Ohio State against Oregon on a neutral field a few weeks earlier, I'll take Ohio State again. If I took Texas over Alabama on a neutral field a few weeks earlier, I'll take Texas over Alabama again, which would mean I've got Texas versus Ohio State in the national championship game, just like I did a month ago in my predictions. That hasn't changed. And just like I had a month ago, I don't think I'm going to change my pick. So I'm going to take Ohio State over Texas to win the national championship. Now, as the pretend confetti rains down over me, a couple of questions here. Let's just say it were to play out like this. What does the rematch crowd say? There was a crowd that did not like that we had rematches like in 2011 in the BCS game, or in 21. You had the SEC title game, and then Georgia, Bama right there in Indy again a month later for the national title, and we need to expand the playoff. Well, what would the rematch crowd say if an expanded playoff just led to more of the same that you had seen a month earlier? Number two, and this is the more important conversation, would this lead anyone, or here's a better question, will the way the playoff plays out this year lead anyone in a position of power to rethink the bye structure? Because the bye structure is garbage in this format. I was listening to our buddies over at College Football Nerds talk earlier today. They're right. They always nail this kind of stuff. Like, I go full ADD on this. I lose my attention span when we're talking about brackets and rules and stuff like that. But even I get this one. This is messed up. And what's going to end up happening is you're going to have people like me who say there should be no guarantee that those buys are reserved for conference champs. You should just take the best 12, and I don't even want auto bids, period. But keep your G5 auto bid if you need to, but just let the best 4 have the buys. But then I know what the counter is. You don't have to yell at me. The counter is, well, if you do that, you take away the motivation and incentive to win the conference championship, and you've got to maintain the sanctity of the conference championship. To which I say, look at this piece of paper. I've got 2 rematches of conference title games happening a month later. So given this scenario, what integrity of conference titles did we maintain if you go and play it and risk injury in doing so in Atlanta and Indianapolis, and then a month later you're just playing each other again anyway? And by the way, you're not guaranteed to have the same winner in those games. So not only is the value of it deteriorated, the sanctity of the outcome may be deteriorated. Oh, by the way, one of these matchups features teams playing for the 3rd time in a given year. So, is there a debate about that? Can't know, because it's the first time we've been around this merry-go-round, so we can't really know what it's going to sound like. But that's what I got right now. I got Ohio State versus Texas. The Big Ten's best and the SEC's best, shocker, is what I think the matchup will be in the national title game. And I'll go with the Buckeyes. And let me remind you, Colin, keep that up for just a second, immunity. Let me just remind you, if this were to happen, okay, I want you to think about the Ryan Day roller coaster here. If this plays out, presumably, you just watched Ohio State beat Michigan, then beat Oregon, then beat Georgia, then beat Oregon again, and then beat Texas. By my count, Mr. Can't Win the Big Game wins 5 of them in a row. And what are you saying about Ryan Day then? What? Because I know what I'm doing. I'm having Colin and Jesse cut up the 37 times that we told you he eventually would. So that's what I would do. Some of you guys need to find a hole to dig and crawl in. If he were to do this, if he goes on this run, whew, now, if he loses to Michigan for a 4th consecutive year, you reserve the right to throw this footage back in my face, and all's fair in that case. So there's my national champ. The Ohio State Buckeyes, my national champ. Nothing's going to go wrong here. We just nailed that entire thing. They're watching us in Griffin, Georgia. They're watching us in Vancouver, British Columbia. Pineville, Louisiana, Costa Mesa, California. You know, it's not lost on me that we have games this week. And we've got one in particular taking place in Dublin, Georgia. No, check that. Dublin, Ireland. I've got my own feel on why it's not the best of ideas to take this sport international. But don't let me stop you from being excited about this, by all means, because that's a topic for like April. First game preview of the year, FSU versus Georgia Tech. Now make sure you have your clock set. Dublin, Ireland, a little bit ahead of us. So it's going to be a night game over there, but it's a 12 Eastern time kickoff for us. Right now, the odds presented by FanDuel on this game, Florida State minus 10.5. You got a total in the mid-50s, 55.5. Now I know to many of you, myself included, this seems sort of like an ambush spot. And if you think it through and you know the teams at all, you're thinking Georgia Tech had a ton of program energy at the end of last year. They had nearly a 14-point per game increase offensively from 2022 to 23. So, I mean, that trend, maybe not that steep, but it seems to continue this year. Offensive line is one of the strengths of this team. Haynes King at quarterback is back. They led the ACC in rushing last year. One of 6 quarterbacks, by the way. King was one of 6 quarterbacks in the ACC. Actually, check that, all of college football, to throw for 25 and to run for 10 scores. So there's a lot that's back for a team that showed a lot of promise last year. Conversely, you know, you had a lot of departures to the draft with Florida State, not the least among them Jordan Travis. So DJ Uiagalelei, not an unknown commodity, very proven, been consistent in his production over the last 2 years. We're getting him in there. We ask ourselves the whole truck versus trailer concept. Some guys can pull other guys up to a different level. Other guys need to be pulled up to another level. Well, when it comes to Florida State at quarterback and their wide receivers, which one's which? And so, yeah, I could see that being an ambush spot. Certainly, if you're going to catch Florida State, you want to catch them early this year. Or do you? I'm not so sure I buy into that. Florida State's got a shot to go down here. I don't know that I just automatically want to play this team early. So the reason I say that is a couple of fold. Florida State, I think, has more ways to suck the life out of this game. Their defensive line should be able to match up with the strength of this team. Georgia Tech's strength's offensive line should be able to be a good matchup there. Love Florida State up front. Florida State's defense in general should be able to win them games early this year. If they need to buy that offense time, I think they can do it. Their run game should be able to, over 4 quarters, give them the physical edge over Georgia Tech. They've got better athletes than Georgia Tech. They have recruited and portaled to the degree that they can lose the kind of talent they lost and still be a very, very high-level, formidable opponent. DJ, 3rd and 5+ is probably my most interesting sort of stat bucket for this game. If Georgia Tech finds a way to just force him to be in obvious passing downs on 3rd down, that's where you take your shot. Okay, that's where you push this game out into the deep end a little bit. Because if it's very fundamental, it's very easy to see Florida State's favored by double digits for a reason. But if you make it uncomfortable, that's a stat category that you could do some business in. Now, let's take a look at what we think, what the model thinks. We see what FanDuel thinks. So the model here, we have our own model. Welcome back to college football here. We have our own model. We've got Florida State minus 12.5. So we think the opening line was right. Probably open like 13.5. We think that was more in line with what it should have been. It's come down. It's been bet down. There's been a lot of money, I think, probably on Georgia Tech, and that may not be done. We'll see. I think some late Florida State money will come in here. I'm actually going to be with you. I'm not betting against Mike Norvell in an opener. Have we not learned our lesson here? I also don't necessarily know how to quantify being able to bottle up, being totally overlooked for the playoff last year, but I don't think it's irrelevant. There's a lot of pent-up anger and frustration to the point where you're not catching that program on its heels to start the season. If you beat them, you're going to have to go play a better football game than them. I'm not sure Georgia Tech will. I think Florida State will win this. It's a competitive game, not a blowout game, but I think over the span of 4 quarters, kind of tack on a late score, Florida State wins this, and I think Florida State covers as well. Okay, we'll be breaking down a ton of games next week this time. Major announcement on the show tonight. Let me clear the throat. I didn't bring any water in here. That's a shame. Well, still, the throat is cleared. So, big announcement on the show tonight. I am proud to announce that we have entered into a major partnership with FanDuel. Finalized it today, the virtual shaking of the hands. They have made a huge investment. I mean a huge investment in our show. By far the biggest that they've made in the college space to date. They will be not only our exclusive odds provider for this entire college football season, they're sponsoring the Ramen Noodle Express. Friday Night Lines will now be proudly brought to you by FanDuel. That's live on Instagram every Friday night at Late Kick Josh. Make sure you guys are there. If you've never experienced Friday Night Lines, experience it this year, every Friday night. They are also going to be there every step of the way with us as a resource. And I'm telling you, that's the secret value proposition of this. These folks know us. Okay, the folks at FanDuel, they're the ones I wanted to do business with because they're the ones who know the show. They watch the show. They're dead serious about responsible gaming. You see it written on this graphic right here. That's not something that legal made them do. Every time we talk with FanDuel, it's about what can we do to enhance the partnership, what can we do to add value for the viewers, but also can you make sure that you weave this in or that in about responsible gaming. If you can't afford to bet this stuff, straight up, don't be betting this stuff. Do not spend a dime that you couldn't afford to lose. But a lot of you love to have fun with this. I love to have fun with this. We are taking fun to the next level this year. FanDuel could not be prouder to announce that. It's been 2 or 3 years in the making, and this is a huge investment for them in the college football space. If you go sign up, you can either take a picture of this QR code here right now, or you can go to FanDuel.com/CFB promotion. That's how they know we sent you. That's some help for us on our end, but you guys have already made it possible for this to even happen, so I appreciate it. But if you do, go sign up as a result of this, FanDuel.com/CFB promotion, and you'll see the benefits of this woven into the show the entire year. So, golf clap for FanDuel. Not only being on board, they were already on board. They're on board in a major way now. Okay, I wanted to wrap up the show tonight with a really, really good feature that our good friend of the program, Cooper Pategna, put out earlier today. And actually, Colin, make this where you in cut it, because I want to give our boy a shout out in the actual segment. Who are the most talented teams in the country this year? Which doesn't always guarantee anything, but as we always say here, as Mima always said, talent doesn't guarantee you anything, but not guaranteeing, but that's not what Mima said. Not only is that not what Mima said, Colin, don't even include that. Who are the most talented teams in the country? Doesn't guarantee wins. As Mima always said, talent does not guarantee you anything, but not having talent does guarantee you something, and it's a something you will not like. Nailed that Mima quote. First time around, nailed that Mima quote. Those who know. So Cooper Pategna put out a really good piece. It's still up right now over on 247sports.com, and it's looking at the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, which is just a measure of the players you have on your roster and how talented they are. It's not an exact science, but it's pretty fairly accurate. To the tune that Michigan's the only non-top 10, not top 10 from this group that's won a national title in the last decade. I think they were 14th last year and won a national title. Outside of Michigan, everybody who's won a national title in the last decade has been top 10 on this list. So, a couple of takeaways I had from this. The first thing is, it's still Bama and Georgia and Ohio State and then everybody else. There's a misnomer floating around the old water cooler that Bama's down a notch. Bama's still got the most talented roster in college football. Like, after Caleb Downs left, after Isaiah Bond left, after their usual draft departures. Now, there's no huge gap, but it's them and Georgia and Ohio State 1, 2, 3, just like it's always been. And if you listen to folks talk like, Bama's sort of taking a backseat talent-wise. I'm telling you, they have not. They're going to be right there. They'll be right there again at the end of the day. Those three have been there for a long time. But I think beyond that's where the fun really begins. It's still in it for Clemson. Look at this list right here. If you're listening to me on podcast, the top 5 is Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, and then there's Texas, and then there's Clemson. You believe that? You think Clemson's got the 5th most talented roster in the country? Well, they got it. They got a lot of them there. They're number 5. Their defensive front stacked like it has been in years past. They got some young and very promising receivers that I think you'll see against Georgia. Like, I think you'll see him pop against Georgia. which reminds me, Georgia's nearly a 2-touchdown favorite against Clemson. So if you were to look at that list and that list alone, that wouldn't make sense. So what an odds maker's telling you is either the gap between number 2 and number 5 is that wide, or Clemson's not living up to the reputation of their talent profile. Maybe Clemson pulls the upset, shuts everyone up. Really fun matchup to watch there in week 1. And here's another takeaway. Did you check out who number 6 was? Just outside the top 10 there, you see who number 6 was? Oregon's not coming. Oregon's there. They've arrived. Oregon's number 6 here. Oregon's instantly the number 2 most talented roster in the Big Ten the moment they walk in the door. So they're not getting in line. You know, they're not being indoctrinated here. If anything, they're cutting in line, and they're taking one of the front seats, and the rest of you got to bump back a seat. Not only do they have the second most talented roster in this conference, it's very well proportioned. It's not like they're loaded up with receivers and tailbacks and quarterbacks, but they're really lightweight on the line of scrimmage. Not at all. They will take the fight to you on the line of scrimmage. I also think long-term it'll help that program that they got beat the way they got beat in the Pac-12 title game last year. Because there was a firm belief that they held the physical advantage. They were going to be able to outrun, or they're going to be able to run the ball and outrush Washington, and they did not have that, and they did not do that. And that was a little wake-up call. And I think you've seen the result in the attitude they've had, in the players they went and got in the portal. They continue to recruit at a top 5 level, not just top 10 anymore. But instant number 2 in the Big Ten. If I were to have told you a decade ago, down the road, Oregon's going to go to the Big Ten, you would have thought they're going to get steamrolled up front. No, they will steamroll. They will steamroll. Now, they're not going to do that at Michigan. They're not going to steamroll Ohio State. But they are also not going to be steamrolled by either one of them. Did you also look at number 7? Mike Elko's in one of the best positions in the sport. I don't think people realize it. He took over for Jimbo Fisher. He's got the number 7 roster in the country, just right there. There's no burn it down, rebuild from scratch. There's none of that. There is a loaded roster with very, very poor organization. It was mismanaged. He's going to inject both of those immediately. Still gets the benefit of having all the good football players there, and they could pop immediately. I think A&M could be a playoff team this year. This year, they're playoff caliber. And the difference there is, unlike Kalen DeBoer, who takes over Alabama with national championship expectations, that's the standard there. At Texas A&M, Elko's taken over a top 7 roster, but the expectations sort of warped, inverted. People don't expect anything of Texas A&M. People don't hold them to that higher standard. And it's not because they're not capable of it, contrary to popular beliefs, just because they hadn't done it. So you got a place where it's all possible. You got a place where you can do everything the big boys do. You got all the resources the big boys have had, but you hadn't performed like the big boys have. Therefore, someone gets to come in there and be the first to do it. Elko's going to be the first to do it. He'll be a legend there. They'll remember his name there 50 years from now because of what he's about to do. And what he's about to do is he's about to prove a lot of folks wrong who claim that A&M's not capable of being an elite program. They are capable. They're just not. They are going to be proven wrong in thinking this is not an elite job. It absolutely is. Slam dunk elite job. Elko got it. They're going to be better for it. But I'm just trying to remind you, this is not a guarantee of anything, other than he's got some good football players. They're probably better than your mind tells you they are. They play Notre Dame week 1. Notre Dame's got the 10th best roster, according to the team talent composite, and they go play A&M on the road. So we've got number 7 versus number 10 in week 1. We got number 2 versus number 5 in week 1. Ought to be fun. Ought to be really fun. Oh, lastly, if you'll just take a look at 12 and 13, I'll go ahead and tell you who 14 was as well. So 12 is Florida, 13 is Florida State, 14 is Miami. That's the story. That's the story in college football. The state of Florida and the talent profiles of the big 3 in-state teams. Now, UCF has joined that, but these 3 historically have been the big 3 in the state of Florida. I think all 3 of them, if they have any kind of success this year, will continue to rise fairly substantially. Miami, no doubt, is going to continue to skyrocket in team talent composite. They'll be in the top 10 next year. Florida State will probably elevate to the top 10 next year. Florida, with a good class, would probably elevate to the top 10 next year. If they all bake in one more class there. But the thing about it is, someone's going to take a big blow to the groin perceptionally in week 1 when Miami plays Florida. I don't know how that impacts this. If the Florida staff suffers an early loss and they get wobbly and it affects the future of that staff, it obviously affects their recruiting class, and you know how that goes. So the other two, like Florida State and Miami, I feel pretty good about. Florida, if they have a good year this year and they stave off the fate a lot of people already think is sealed for them, they'll all three continue to climb, like all three of those. The big question is, 3 years from now, has one of those separated itself from the other two? That'd be my question. Okay, good long show tonight. Again, appreciate you guys so much. I know we made some announcements tonight. We got more coming. Make sure you're following at Late Kick Josh. Instagram, Twitter especially. Make sure you're following. Until Sunday night, for Director Colin, for interim producer Belchie, how about a good hearty get well soon to producer Jesse? I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to your weekend, and God bless.